So what exactly is astrology? Well, astrology is the study of astronomical events that are then set into a specific paradigm, which presumes what happens above will also happen below. And so there's this idea that the heavens dictate what happens on Earth, or at least can prognosticate human events. Now, what exactly is a paradigm? Paradigm is a statement of how facts relate to each other and why these facts relate to each other. So there's this idea of observation. So you observe what's going on, you write down facts, raw data. And so that's what astrologers and astronomers of old in both the Eastern and Western cultures were one and the same in terms of their practice. So what astronomers and astrologers did was study raw data, raw facts of observing the movements of planets and celestial bodies, and then trying to create an understanding for what it all means. And the reason you try to understand what it all means and put together the patterns, create this paradigm, is presumably to try to strike at some kind of a core truth. This idea that there's something bigger than all of us, a truth that can be derived from this study, from understanding the paradigm. So that's why we study astrology, and that's what astrology is. Some of the different paradigms in just the Western traditions would be, for example, sidereal versus tropical. Sidereal is really more of an Eastern tradition, though, whole signs or Placidus. Whether you work with whole signs astrology or Placidus astrology, and this course is going to teach you both, is basically which paradigm do you subscribe to, just like in, for example, sociology, which is where I'm getting a lot of these ideas, these core concepts. Like like sociology, there's many different paradigms and for explaining why society is the way it is. And so same with astrology, there's different paradigms that explain why what goes on in the heavens dictate and are revealed here on Earth. And so we're going to learn two particular ones in the Western traditions because they seem to be the two prevailing or dominant systems in Western astrology. Now, I actually come from a Chinese astrological background, but I think because of this core foundation in Chinese astrology, I picked up Western astrology very quickly because interestingly enough, the foundational principles in both are pretty much the same. So in Chinese astrology, you have this idea of a binary, an active and a passive. And, in Western astrology, it's the masculine versus feminine zodiac signs. This idea of a core binary that's essential to every single zodiac sign. There's this idea of elements, and every sign has a particular element that's stronger in that. And then the idea of trines and triplicities, how they categorize these various zodiac signs. And then the 4 quadrants, and then also this concept of 8 phases. In the Western, it's more about the 8 phases of the moon, but it's also this idea of the astrological or the zodiac wheel, the wheel and its basis in the equinoxes and solstices. So you have this idea of bringing in space and time, and again, trying to formulate a paradigm that puts together and synthesizes the concept of space and time. So astrology has to be based on both. That's why you have this grounding in the 2 equinoxes and solstices. This idea of the seasons, the wheel of the year, is pretty much the basis of astrology in both Western and Eastern traditions. In the Eastern tradition, we talk about the sun going, the Huangdao, or the path of the sun, going through 12 different zodiac signs. And those 12 zodiac signs also are represented by 24 solar terms. And that's why so the 12 zodiac signs and the 12 solar terms align, and how the sun travels between those is what astrology is based on in the Chinese tradition. In the Western tradition, it's the idea of the 12 zodiac signs, and then you have the 12 months. And that, again, is based on and it's based on the path of the sun. So it's that very interesting dynamic between space and time that astrology and pretty much all cultures that I studied is rooted in. And so for me, there's something very universal about astrology. So no matter which paradigm you use, it strikes at the same core truth that there's something much bigger than all of us. And I think if you are a metaphysical practitioner of any stripe, or you're interested in spirituality in any way, you have to study astrology, because astrology is how you formulate that paradigm, how you understand how all of the parts of the whole fit together. And for me, again, I really disliked astrology. I was into tarot, and I took tarot seriously the minute I got into it. And same with so many of the other divinatory practices and everything else that I did. I was very serious about it from the beginning. But with astrology, I always thought it was kind of like frou-frou and fluffy, and I was never that interested in learning it. And I think it's because, I think it's a lot, really is probably because of sun sign horoscopes. I feel like because they were in the back of like glossy magazines and news, I don't know why, but I just really wasn't that enthusiastic about astrology. But I heard it all over the place, and I found it to be so integral to what I wanted to do, which was craft in any tradition, that I was like, okay, so I forced myself to learn it. And after I learned it, I have to tell you, it really was transformative for me. The more I understand astrology, the more I study astrology and interact with people through astrology, through their natal charts, through transit charts, through horary divination, the more I interact and engage with people through astrology, through the framework that astrology provides, the more I believe in a God. And I don't mean the Judeo-Christian God. I'm talking about a greater intelligent design. And it really was a deep understanding of both Eastern and Western astrology that got me to a point of conviction of that intelligent design. And I mean, I don't want to evangelize, of course. This is a very secular and clear study of the astrological principles and core concepts. But in this introductory video, I kind of wanted to give you a sense of why, sort of the metaphysics of astrology, if you will, you know? And so for me, it's very spiritual. It's about understanding myself, which then is in turn helps me understand the universe around me. And I find that I understand, I'm a better human being because of astrology, because I understand other people better. By nature, I don't consider myself necessarily an empath. And so for me, acquiring empathic abilities, acquiring empathy for people was done through astrology, because if I can see their charts, I can see exactly where they came from, where they're going, all of their soul fragmentation, their scars. And from that, you can't help but empathize with people when you can see their whole lives in a chart. So that's why I'm such a big proponent of astrology, to the point where I would say something that is as dissonant and potentially controversial as this assertion, which is, I don't think you can be a fully well-rounded practitioner of craft if you are not proficient in at least one paradigm of astrology. If you don't understand astrology and you don't have that basic framework or that basic foundational understanding, I just don't understand really how you can be a practitioner of craft. I know it's a very, not everybody, a lot of people disagree with that. I know a lot of people will say to you until their faces turn blue and the cows come home that they're very powerful and wonderful and incredible practitioners of craft, and they've never done anything with astrology whatsoever. They've never done anything with the phases of the moon at all. They don't care about the equinoxes or solstices. They don't care about any of the concepts of the solar terms or the wheel of the year. And you know what? That's great. I don't understand that path. So that's why I can't really comment on it. But in terms of my own path, from what I see and from my perspective, my vantage point of witness, I just don't understand how you can really connect to the universe without understanding astrology, because astrology is the blueprint for how the universe is connected. It's kind of like the architectural map. And so by understanding that, you have an understanding of pretty much everything else. Everything else easily falls into place, which is why I think when you look at esoteric traditions of tarot, and I promise this is not a tarot class, but I think, you know, when you look at esoteric traditions of tarot, it almost always integrates astrology. And there's this big push to understand astrology in connection with tarot. And the reason for that is because of that, again, core concept in Western metaphysics, as above, so below. And you see that in the Eastern traditions as well. This idea, for example, acupuncture, or any concept or feng shui, anything in the Chinese tradition is about the microscopic being a full and perfect representation of the macroscopic. And that's exactly what astrology is. If you understand the macroscopic, how this entire solar system operates, then in some way you can have a better understanding of what's in the microscopic, what's going on in the world around us in terms of politics and society, but also in terms of your own life. So that's why you should study astrology. And that's why I'm really, really glad that you took this class. And I hope I'm able to take you to a place of comfort where you're able to feel very comfortable and confident about the core principles of astrology. That's really what this class is about, the foundation. I don't get into a lot of fancy schmancy stuff, and the reason I don't do that is because I don't think you can get there until you have a rock solid foundation on the core principles. I always begin with theory and paradigms, and that's because if you have a strong foundation in theory, and this isn't just about astrology, you see that the way my pedagogical approach in craft and tarot and anything, even the way I teach people piano and violin or how I teach cooking, it's all the same. If you have a very strong foundation, after you build that rock solid foundation, you excel and surpass everybody else around you very, very quickly. So there is no intermediate step. You go from beginner to advanced very, very quickly if you have a solid foundation. So we're not going to talk about any advanced concepts yet. And people keep asking me, are you going to teach an intermediate or advanced class in astrology? Maybe, I don't know, but I hope. Actually, my mission is that after this class, you don't need an intermediate or advanced course in astrology because you have such a strong foundation that you're able to really use creativity to take you to another place in this study. Oh, speaking of creativity, that was another thing I wanted to talk about in terms of paradigms. How astrology is categorized. Is it characterized as a science or an art? Well, in sociology, in terms of any paradigm is going to be a little bit of both. It's going to be a science, an observation of raw data, and that's fact-based. So there's a sense of black and white facts and logic to forming a paradigm, and then there's the speculative imagination. Raw data cannot connect itself into a cohesive pattern without speculative imagination. And so likewise, astrology is the same thing. It's this concept of taking together raw data and trying to figure out how it all comes together. So in terms of the raw data you'll be working with, it's, for example, the sun in Aries, or the moon in Aquarius, or that the Neptune is in square with the moon. These are the ideas that you're going to be looking at, the raw data in a chart. And how you interpret that is based in small part on sort of the traditional concepts and the core essential meanings we understand for all of the signs and planets and houses. But there definitely is an art to it. And you'll see as we progress in this class that there is definitely a strong component of intuition and speculative imagination that helps you create the narrative. It's a lot like tarot reading. I know there's many different schools of thought on tarot, but basically I believe that there's an essential meaning to the card, which is based on numerology. It's based on astrology, I believe. It's based on the elements, but there is a core meaning there that's been sort of formed not only by various other paradigms, but this collective consciousness. Over time, people have infused and created reality. So with the consciousness that all of these collective metaphysicians brought to tarot, these cards have now acquired specific meanings because the consciousness that other metaphysicians that came before us had created that reality that we now inherit. So we do inherit core concepts that the 78 cards in tarot mean, just like we inherit core concepts of what the various planets mean, what the various astrological houses refer to. And interestingly, the 12 houses in astrology, in Western astrology and Eastern astrology, are very similar. So there is something that we've inherited from that collective consciousness that's arguably immutable. but it can be changed by the collective consciousness again, and that's where we get into differences in or transitions between traditional astrology and modern astrology. You have when astronomy comes up, realizes, for example, that Pluto is a dwarf planet. It's not actually a planet now, and in fact Pluto is on the same level as Ceres and Chiron. So now modern astrologies, we're starting to form a new reality. We're starting to form a collective consciousness around the meanings of Ceres, Chiron, Black Moon Lilith, White Moon Lilith. Those are not planets or dwarf. Those are personal sensitive points. But these core concepts that weren't availed or accessible to ancient astrologers are now accessible to modern astrologers. And together as a community, again, it's that collective consciousness that's creating a reality. But that reality is sort of something that you inherit in part as you learn astrology. But then an actual reading is that part plus, like I said, the speculative imagination, understanding the story. And so that's, again, why I feel like there's so much correlation between tarot and astrology. Tarot is the same way. You know, cards can take on different meanings based on what other cards are around them. Relationships, it's all about relationships, and that's the same in astrology. How you are. You're not just one sort of immutable personality. How you are around your mother, the behavior you take on around your mom is very different from your behavior and conduct around your best friend, or around a complete stranger, or around your boss, you know. And so who you are in all of these different scenarios is a little bit different, but you're still you. There's still an essential core to your spirit and consciousness. It's just the manifestation in any specific time and place is going to be different based on the relationships. And so that's the same thing in astrology. In tarot, it's the same thing. That's why we have tarot spreads. In astrology, it's the angular aspects that are the most important. I don't necessarily get to the angular aspects till the end. And then we do spend a lot of time on angular aspects in the latter half of it. But in the beginning, we have to understand essential energies first. You have to understand the core fundamental principles of astrology before you can start understanding relationships. Just like how we always say, love yourself before you can get into a really healthy romantic relationship. It's kind of the same concept, where you really need to understand yourself before you can understand relationships. And astrology really resonates with that principle. You have to understand Neptune and understand House 8 and understand the moon and understand these various astrological essentials before you can start understanding how they relate to each other. So, welcome to this wonderful journey. I know I've spoken a lot in the introduction. There's going to be more videos that come in and as I try to progress. But now it's time to start reading. So I want you to start reading the book. You can just start from page 1. But I want to tell you something else. How you're going to learn is not from these videos. It's going to be from something you create yourself. I'm going to ask you to create your own book on astrology. So this is mine. Actually, the first cover is new. I actually printed this out and put it here just so it can kind of look like the one that you're going to be creating. But you'll see that everything else is very old and it's handwritten for the most part. But basically, it's a binder with various tabs, and it's just basically information I've collected over the years. And a lot of it I want you to incorporate into your own journal as well. I give you a skeleton of what I refer to as the astrology grimoire, but basically it's just a study journal. But this is really the best way to learn. It's active, it's engaged, it's a practicum where you are downloading information into your head, but then when you have to write it, when you have to transcribe it and organize it and figure out where things go, and then you have this big book that you can sort of look through, you learn very quickly. You just find that, the learning curve is just very exponential for you. So that's why I strongly urge the astrology journal. I think that's really where all of the learning is going to happen. You take notes through the astrology journal. So as you go through the book, and this book is going to be a 2-volume workbook set, or it can be one workbook. It depends on what you want. Basically, it's 530 pages that I decided to separate into two different volumes. So you have 2 workbooks. But for those who want to work digitally or want, one big book, then you can use it as that. So there's 2 versions that you're going to get. That's how you're going to be studying through the workbook, doing all of the exercises. But in my answers to a lot of the exercise prompts, I give quote unquote model, well, not model, sample answers. I do sort of get a little bit into various interpretations. And when you find something that resonates with you in anything inside the book, put it in your journal. Again, you're going to be creating your own book by the end of this course. Now, how long does this class take? So it took me about 3 weeks to write the 500 pages for you. So I hope it'll take you, what's that times 2? 6 weeks? I don't know. Think of it as a semester. How's that? So this will be a semester course. We're going to spend a semester together through the workbooks, through your textbook. And in that textbook, the final independent study project that you have to produce will be your own astrology grimoire or your own study journal. And once you have the study journal, that's all you're going to be relying on. When you go and find bits and pieces of astrological information, you can search the internet, watch YouTube videos, sit in on seminars, and when you learn more astrological data, you're going to organize it and put it into your journal. And so this will become a really big fat book of knowledge, a big fat book of everything that you learn or come across that's astrology related that you feel like you want to be able to incorporate into your practice. Then anytime you want to sit down to do any sort of astrology reading, in the beginning, it's open book. You whip out your astrology journal or your astrology grimoire, and you use that as your reference. You don't need books. You don't need, which is the best book on astrology? This is going to be the best book on astrology you have, okay? Because it's going to be a cohesive combination of everything from everybody that you admire, all of the experts, all compacted into one. And this is how I learned astrology, by being very diligent with an astrology grimoire or an astrology journal. So I'm going to ask you to do the same thing. All right, I hope you're excited, and I will see you back soon enough.